Chapter 1 Ghosts of Yesterday. An audible crack of bones snapping vibrated through the concrete wall as Alex narrowly avoided the incoming fist. Maintaining a tight offensive stance, he watched Luis's jittery movements, anticipating another attack. Luis retracted his crumpled fist and held it limp in the other, offering a disrespectful glare in many silent insults. Alex followed his instinct and took this as an opportunity, returning the favor with a hard blow to Luis's lower jaw. The impact stunned him for a brief moment and made the initial opening something of a glaring fallacy. Alex slid to the left, getting his back away from the wall, retreating a few steps and nearly tripping over a bucket of plaster. A tender, icy wind plucked at the short bristle hair on his head, rolling previous sweat from the day down his brow and over one eye. He wiped it away, and the two locked eyes, their energy blazing within the small gap. Luis wiped the saliva from the edge of his mouth and exhaled sharply, his breath a light mist in the chilled air. The few apprehensive onlookers kept their distance, placing silent bets on a victor while equally hoping there would be none. Alex observed his surroundings, taking note of the 10-foot empty pool a few feet to his left and the heavy tools which littered the ground. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but it kept his attention split. Panting at their own pace, the two soaked in the sun's delicate rays with fierce eyes. Luis was a stocky but short Hispanic guy in his mid-30s, harboring a quick fuse and a lot of pent-up aggression. He paraded around with a cocky mouth and an annoying habit of undoing and redoing his ponytail, as if his long hair would impress any of the other guys. The crew couldn't help but make fun of his stereotypical behavior at times, but kept the tone light enough not to upset him. That being said, he was a nice guy, gentle when he needed to be, unless you got under his skin. Right now, Alex had to show he couldn't be intimidated. This was more than a battle of strength. It was a display of physical prowess, not just for them, but for their gawking friends. Alex smirked, and with a relaxed posture, he lifted his shirt off. As he raised it over his head, he swayed to the side, off-balanced and almost falling over. Off-balanced enough to almost topple over. He got the fabric off and threw it to the ground, the brisk air licking the exposed skin around his dirty wife-beater. He was by no means ripped, but the muscles he boasted were nothing to scoff at given his age and work history. However, the many scars and discolored skin from past trauma were quite visible on his collarbone, biceps, and forearms, giving him the overall win for visual intimidation. The breezy air swirled around, rebounding off the tight corners and short fence that caged them in this workplace. The amount of heated energy contained within this open box amped up even the spectators. As a joke, Robert leaned over and turned the volume knob for the box radio they had resting on a toolbox, cranking up the hard rock music in the background, charging them even more. Consumed by the latent fury burning in his chest, Luis closed the small gap with a predictable jab. Alex slowly blocked the incoming punch with the back of his left arm, but Luis was not about to fight like a lightweight boxer. Following the single punch, he kicked at Alex's leg, which staggered him, giving Luis the chance to punch him square in the face. He took the punch, and his body shivered down to the bone. With a sloppy, half-coordinated fist, Alex responded with a similar punch. Luis turned his head to avoid a nose hit, but instead took the full brunt of his fist to the right ear. The low murmur of the surrounding eyes grew, and the situation became much more intense. Alex hastily regained his balance and took a step back, only now noticing the sting in his right hand. A deep bloody gash on his middle knuckle dripped red to the concrete below. Looking back at Luis, he saw even more blood pouring down the side of his neck. He didn't seem terribly bothered by the blood. Instead, he reached up and grabbed hold of the earring that had gotten caught by the punch and tore it the rest of the way through his lobe, tossing it to the ground. This consequence of their scuffle especially ticked him off. "I've had enough of your shit, Avery," he pointed, asserting dominance in his voice. Alex's eyes were heavy. When he spoke, the words came out slow, messy. "I'm still waiting for you to do something about it, pussy." Luis's nose twitched. Alex went on the offensive, scooping up a plastered knife from the ground and throwing it at him as he closed in. The knife completely missed Luis, but still made him flinch. This allowed Alex to grab him by the shirt collar and drag him to the ground, slamming him onto his back within feet from the concrete pool edge. Luis grabbed Alex by the wrist and attempted to pry, but wasn't able to make him budge. With his other arm free, Luis threw his open hand up into Alex's face, pushing up from under his chin and trying to get him to loosen his grip. Alex pulled him up by his shirt and then slammed him back onto the ground with very little strength. The impact did nothing but give Luis a chance at sliding both hands between his arms and then expanding outward, breaking his hold. "Motherfucker!" Luis growled and headbutted Alex in the chin. His mind went fuzzy for just a moment, but he maintained his composure. It was at this time that Robert and the other workers stood up and began inching closer, in case things got out of hand. However, unbeknownst to anyone, one worker in particular had slipped away from the group. Alex secured his arms for a moment, but lost his advantage when he got greedy and went for another punch, allowing Luis to slip one arm free and reach up for his neck. As his fingers clasped around his throat, Alex took hold of his wrist and pried it away. Now the advantage had shifted to Luis, who gained new leverage over Alex. In that moment, Luis was able to shift his torso and use his restrained arm to shake his balance and then continue the momentum to roll to the side, flipping Alex to the ground and taking his position on top. Now, Alex had his neck at the pool edge, which dug into his upper vertebrae. No time was wasted as Luis swiftly punched Alex in the face multiple times while putting pressure on his neck. With one final, desperate effort, Alex propelled his waist upward with the power of his legs and sent Luis over his head. The airborne man flailed his arms before crashing down 10 feet into the empty pool. The hard smack of his body echoed in their ears, and everything went still. Breathless, frozen, the onlookers gawked in horror. All except for Alex, who rolled onto his stomach and got to a kneeling position, his eyes fixated on Luis below. "And there it is." Robert sighed angrily before he elbowed Dalton, and the two ran a few feet to their left and began their descent down the ladder into the pool. The two of them got by his side quickly and gave him a once-over. A brief moment of tension, then a thumbs up from Dalton indicated he was all right. Alex sighed and stood up with moderate ease. He took this moment of solitude to observe the pool, taking note of the progress they had made replacing tiles yesterday. Just on the opposite side of the pool, only 5 or so feet away from where he landed, was a few buckets of plaster, a mix of tools, and a sharp mound of broken tiles they had discarded. A thought occurred to him as the two men lifted Luis on their shoulders. If this fight had started on the other side of the pool, it could have had a completely different ending. Feeling the sway in his body, he maneuvered himself over to the ladder and assisted the team of men in extracting him from the pool while someone else called an ambulance. Robert was a 6'3" lumberjack of a man with a glowing orange beard and tattoos up and down both arms. A human tank with a heart of gold and glitter. So it was no surprise to see him support Luis on one shoulder with ease. Dalton, on the other hand, was the oldest and nearly 5 inches shorter than Rob. While sturdy in his own right, he struggled to assist. He found it difficult to apply strength and be gentle at the same time. Getting him out of the pool shouldn't have been so difficult, but considering his fall, they had to move slowly and carefully to avoid furthering any injuries he may have sustained. With those conditions, it took them nearly 10 minutes to get him out safely. The outdoor swimming pool was enclosed in a tall wooden fence and shared a wall with a hotel that owned it. There were 2 ways in or out. One was the double doors that led into the hotel, but those doors were locked tight. The other was a wide door in the fence which led to a small footpath around the building to the parking lot. The hotel was separated from local residents, but was neighbored to a gas station, diner, and car wash. The fence was put in place for privacy of its guests, which luckily served to keep this incident hidden from the potential public. Robert sat beside Luis and kept his head propped up with a bundled sweatshirt. Dalton sighed and went over to the still blasting radio, turning the volume down and then shutting it off entirely, bringing a harsh silence that fed the awkward vibe. Alex stumbled away from the group, taking a seat against the wall of the hotel, leaning his head back and closing his eyes. A few moments after they got Luis out, they all heard the pathway door swing open with a rusty creak and turned to see Benny coming in through the door. Benny was the new kid, a scrawny guy fresh out of high school, forced by his nagging mother to get this job with his uncle Luis. He was naive, but acted with an unrivaled sense of morality. Everyone turned their heads toward the gate and saw him enter, finding it odd that he had stopped to hold the gate open. The reason became quite clear when they saw their site manager walk in behind him. Everyone immediately averted their eyes, except for Robert, who exchanged worried glances with their boss, Paul. Alex had started to doze off, indicative by the thin stream of drool leaking from his lip. He heard the gate open and peeled open his eyes, allowing the focus to return slowly. He leaned forward, spitting onto the ground and wiping away the drool. That's when Paul saw him. They locked eyes for a moment before Paul turned away. Right then, Alex knew. That one quick glance transferred so many emotions and gave him the necessary information. Shit. Alex whispered to himself as he reached into his back pocket and slipped a cigarette from the pack. He placed it between his lips and held it loosely, leaving it cold. Benny had slipped away again, back through the gate, but not before receiving thanks for bringing this to his attention. Alex stood up, using the wall to assist him. Paul approached the gathering. The 60-year-old wrecking ball of a man walked with broad shoulders and a puffed chest, boasting his aged, concrete body, which was stacked all of 5 feet and 5 inches. The years of experience were carved in every canyon-sized wrinkle on his face. His eyes, lips, and brows were narrow, evaluating. No doubt crunching business numbers at the back of his head, while also calculating how quickly he could kick all of their asses. He stopped before Robert, taking his time silently analyzing the situation. He looked to each of his crewmen, reading their faces and body language, most of which remained still and avoided direct eye contact. His eyes fell on Luis, his unconscious body lying on the ground. Lastly, he looked to Alex, who held the cigarette between his lips with a hazy stare. Goosebumps coated his skin in the chilly weather, but he didn't seem bothered. Paul collected his anger, but the steamy breaths that fell from his hooked nose were all the warning they needed. He kept his eyes fixated on Alex, allowing the silence to linger a little bit longer before speaking. "It's 30 degrees out here. Put on a fucking shirt, you lanky bastard," he said to Alex with irritation in his dull voice. Alex shifted the cigarette to the other side of his mouth, his head cocked at an angle, then stepped away to grab his shirt that had been discarded during the fight. Everything was so quiet. Any other part of the city would be bustling and obnoxious, but out here in the boonies, all was still in comparison. As he returned to the group with his shirt back on, Paul let out a long, hot sigh. "This hotel has to be up and running in less than 2 weeks. This pool is the last thing on their to-do list, and they still need to test the filtration system, water heater, and drains. They can't do that until the tiles are laid and this mess is cleaned up." He took a brief pause, glancing to make sure they were listening. "All that work to be done, and I have to waste my time driving all the way out here because a bunch of degenerate children can't do a simple tile job without beating the shit out of each other." His voice grew progressively louder. Everyone was quiet. No one wanted to escalate the situation or cause any more tension between each other. Paul then turned his eyes to Luis and silently shook. "Can somebody tell me what the hell happened here?" He tried to keep his cool. Alex reached into his front pocket and removed a lighter. They looked to him and watched as he raised the flame. He stopped just short of the stick and caught the glare of his boss, whose eyes were furious. Seeing this, he let a sharp exhale through his nose and proceeded to light the cigarette. He slid the lighter into his pocket and took a long, smooth drag. Then he took the stick from his mouth and dropped it to the ground, releasing the smoke from his lungs as he crushed it. Twitching in anger, Paul pointed his meaty finger. "Avery, come with me," he instructed, then turned to Robert. "If anyone wants to speak with me, tell them to wait. This won't take long." Robert nodded. Paul turned to his right and motioned towards a set of double doors that led into the building. He followed his boss and waited patiently while he juggled a massive keyring. When he found the correct one, they stepped inside and closed the doors tight behind them. They were immediately met by the unmistakable scent of cheap, powdered rug cleaner and bleach that assaulted their nostrils. As Paul switched on a light, Alex couldn't help but wish there was a window nearby to crack open. The doors behind them suctioned closed, and a claustrophobic pressure emanated in the newly found silence. The pressure he felt in his chest was only amplified by the trembling heat rising off Paul's body. It didn't take long for him to open his mouth. "Why would you do this to me, Alex? I mean, what would your aunt say?" He showed fatigue in his voice while rubbing the bridge of his nose with a squinted face. "I don't think she's surprised anymore." He snickered. There was an immature flattery in his words. "She's had plenty of time to become jaded. Did I ever tell you about the time I almost broke a kid's nose in 6th grade? He said with a smile. It was painfully obvious he was in a varied mindset. You're not hearing me. This is... Clocked him square in the face for ditching me in school. Paul grit his teeth. If you don't shut your trap... Alex interrupted again. Of course, my old man beat the hell out of me for it. All that did was put him in jail. He laughed at himself. Paul stewed in anger. Now that you mention it, he said with a sharp tongue, you have told me the story before. You told me that was the very first time you got drunk, during school. Yep, sure was, he boasted. Are you drunk now? Well, not now, but I was this morning, he said obliviously. What time? Paul emphasized. Like 9? Paul was dumbstruck. It's 11:15. Happy fucking New Year, Alex slurred. New Year's was almost 3 months ago, Paul screamed. This is the 4th time this month you've shown up to work like this. And guess what? It's the last time. Alex receded a bit, taking the situation a little more seriously now. Can you explain to me what fucking happened exactly? I need to make sure that the story you tell me matches the one Robert and the guys tell the paramedic, or cops, or whoever. Alex removed both hands from his pockets, then reached into the back and removed the carton of cigarettes. He held the pack in his hand, and at the same time reached up to scratch his scruffy chin. Luis, motherfucker, pissed me off, he stated. Care to elaborate? He returned his hand to his pocket. I was trying to tell Benny how to lay tile when the weather is colder like today. The kid was being impatient and didn't let them mount properly. He broke 10 tiles and I might have yelled at him a bit. Why didn't you tell Robert? I left him in charge for a reason. I was busy. It wasn't that big a deal until Luis got involved. He got in my face and I told him to fuck off. So he grabbed me and threw me into the wall. Said he had enough of my shit or something. Paul was quiet, laying out the pieces before him and assigning his words with past endeavors. And that's the truth? He nodded, his body canted slightly to the wall as he caged more harsh opinions and attempted to resist a growing headache. Clearly stressed, constantly sighing or taking deep breaths, Paul contemplated the situation, evidently calming down enough to be rational. Alex, I know you're a damn good worker. You know your shit and always get the job done. But these occurrences can't continue. This job was supposed to be a new leaf. I don't understand. You seem to be doing so well these past few months, and now you're back at it. What do you gain from drinking, son? His focused stare transitioned smoothly from a heated heart to genuine concern, a shift Alex refused to notice. There are some emotions he has specifically exiled from his heart, given proper criteria. In a time like this, admitting he was wrong and showing that raw regret was something he fought against. Instead, he became something of an effigy for reasons he couldn't quite express. Doing just that, Alex leaned harder and stared at the floor. That instinct to respond with some vulgar retort was strong. However, he remained stoic, thinking. It's my only bandage, Paul. His voice was hollow. Both of their eyes were stale for vastly different reasons. There's just so much shit I can't let go of. I keep seeing her in my fucking dreams, but I see him in the mirror. All I want to do is bash my skull into the glass until this nightmare ends. His voice was wavering. The alcohol in his system removed many barriers set in place from years of emotional stagnation. Paul stepped closer and placed his hand on his shoulder. The weight of his bones off-balanced the weakened man and caused him to dip slightly. I knew Barbara and John for a long time. They were good people. Your mother especially was something of a saint in my eyes. I'm not telling you to forget them or ignore this. I'm just telling you to think about what's important here. Your life. He grabbed the pack of cancer from his hand and held it up to Alex's face. Or your vices. He sneered. Isn't that what life is? A sad pile of lies and vices? There was a moment where time seemed to stop. The two contemplated in silence, tasting the bitter sadness that contaminated the hall. In that silence, there was a faint siren in the distance, steadily growing closer. Paul sighed, rubbing his forehead, trying to find something powerful to say, but fell short. I just don't understand. You've got a good job, a bachelor pad, and cable TV. What more can a young man ask for? That statement made Alex click his tongue and look away, sadness swiftly replaced by irritation. Folding his arms, he chuckled lightly to himself and then looked to the dark ceiling with an empty smirk. One more good. You know, your ignorance is getting a bit bloated. You've got money spilling from your ass and shit from your mouth. A man can ask for plenty more when he has nothing and no one to share anything with. His sensitivities were gone. A small ember burned behind his eyes, ready to be unleashed. Paul didn't look surprised by his retort. I want you to know, nothing you say is going to make this any easier or harder. Just then, a knock came at the door. They each turned to face the noise, and Paul was quick to undo the latch. As the door creaked open, Alex pushed himself away from the wall to peer over Paul's shoulder. On the other side was an uncomfortable-looking Robert. Just thought you should know that the paramedics are here, and Luis is awake.